welcome to the next kind of iteration of this panel for the Higher Ed Digital Community Builders. I am joined today by three awesome social media and marketing directors from across the world. My name is Tyler Thomas, and I am the Senior Director of Integrated Content at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And today I am joined by Emma, Jenny, and Jenny, and we are going to talk about the best practices versus reasonable expectations for social media in higher ed. So what does that mean? We don't know for sure, but we're going to explain it to you as we go through these kind of questions. As we are going through, if you do have additional questions, please leave them in the comments. We will get back to you. We are pre-recording this, so once you add your comments into the Facebook piece, we will go back and answer them. Or if you have questions, all of us are on Twitter and you can find us there as well. To get us kickstarted, I am going to have each of the panelists briefly introduce themselves and talk about their goals and responsibilities as they relate to social media at their institution. So we're going to start with Emma, and Emma's just going to briefly introduce herself and then talk about her role in the social space. Emma?
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Gill-Martin and I am Head of Social Media and Student Communications at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. It's lovely to be here and involved in the panel today. My role is to oversee all the social media activity as well as student comms, so that includes our newsletter and portal and website and other things. It works quite nicely to have the two sitting together, although it's quite busy. Mostly we look at sort of brand and reputation, and we feel like our kind of USP is our storytelling, and we very much use our people. Glasgow is well known for being, a very friendly city, and with the university, even though we're really old, we can be a bit of fun with our brand. We don't have to be stuffy, and so we use our people for our storytelling and obviously support brand, reputation, recruitment and conversion, but have a bit of fun with our social media as well.
Oh. Maybe Tyler is frozen, so I'll just jump right in. Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Lee Fowler of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'm the Director of Social Media Strategy. I do manage the flagship social media channels, as well as create and execute all of the social media portions of our institute-wide communications announcements or anything with a presidential focus. That's what I work on.
And I'm Jenny Petty. I'm the Vice President of Marketing Communications at the University of Montana, which is a relatively new role for me. I've been here 6 weeks, but my role is to build and protect the University of Montana brand, drive results, and tell the UM story. And I oversee teams that do everything from strategic comms to brand strategy to our social media and digital teams as well.
Awesome. It's so good to have all three of you here today. I'm really excited for the conversation. I also hope that this recording has been continued because I just froze for a minute. So hopefully that's our last freeze and we'll keep going. So welcome to Zoom world. It keeps us on our toes. So kind of our first question to really get us kicked off is, as platforms continue to change, and we're specifically talking about social media, but Emma and Jenny, I know you also work across other platforms, and it's not just the social space. So if you want to talk about how those work, that's completely fine and really helpful. But how do you stay informed in these changes? So we know that platforms are changing algorithms, expectations, character lengths, functionality. What are some of your go-to resources or habits to stay informed on these changes? And this is kind of an open forum, so anybody wants to start.
Sure. I'll jump on in. For me, I think all of us are always reading, all the latest information, or we're just reading in general all the time while we're at our desks. And I just find that, there are some really good newsletters out there that are really helpful. Like, I think two of my favorites are, I think it's called Geek Out Newsletter by Matt Navarra, and all of the newsletter, all of the information that comes out of HubSpot is really, it's very helpful and valuable as well. And honestly, I'm I almost like Twitter is almost like my second home. And so the information that's shared across all Twitter by other social media managers and other marketers it's just almost real time. Like something gets announced and someone seems to pick up on it. So I find that really helpful too. So it's just I think being present in the space and just kind of living in the spaces. But I'll just add this. I think that a lot of times in being in the higher ed space, we do go to a lot of higher ed conferences and they're immensely valuable and helpful. But once in a while, I do like to go to outside of higher, like industry conferences and straight marketing conferences, because that's where you really learn about the things that are just evolving, right? Or just launching. And so that's where you can really start to see things that people are working on that you might see a year or two down the pipeline. So I find that really helpful as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would just echo Twitter especially the higher ed community on Twitter is just phenomenal. And I found so many great resources and folks there. I also look to our students. I really am a fan of having student interns who can help me stay on trend, as well as being a student of the private sector and looking for trends that are coming out of private industry, like Jenny said, is super helpful. And I will echo HubSpot as well. I'm a huge HubSpot fan, and their resources are phenomenal in all sorts of different facets. I would say this too, like I came up in the content management, social management world. I was never as good at it as you folks are. But so I have a deep respect for folks who are in that space, and how somebody this morning described it to me like, it's like shoveling coal in a steam engine, trying to keep up with social media trends. It never ends. And so from a leadership perspective, I try to give that role a lot of grace. Like the work is hard, it's constantly changing. And staying up on those trends is like shoveling coal into a steam engine. So
I like it.
Yeah. Now I want to go travel. I need to get into a steam engine. Emma, did you have some things to add?
I agree with everything. I get so much inspiration from the higher ed Facebook groups and Twitter mainly. The same, I just love seeing what people are sharing, and everyone's so open. That's what's lovely about the sector. They sort of share their best experiences and they're not sort of closed in keeping their trade secrets. And also speaking to students, we're planning our commencement, I guess you call it in the States, but graduation content. And we went to the students to ask who they would want to hear videos from, because I'm a bit far from that age group and I didn't have a clue. And the people they suggested was someone from Drag Race UK, and I hadn't even thought about that person, that they're all watching that show and they would love, the person's from Glasgow, so they would love to hear from them. So I'll see whether we can do that. But yeah, just using them as sounding boards to check ideas, because they may say something's completely rubbish and then you don't need to spend time sort of planning that out as part of your strategy. And following youth marketing groups and youth charities, and again to get ideas about the way they're using platforms and stuff. But I would say that just because certain platforms are good for other institutions doesn't mean it suits your brand, and you don't have to be on every channel. It's about finding what sort of resonates with the work that you're doing and what you have resource for as well.
Emma, let me build on that a little bit. So as leaders within your areas and at your institutions, how do you evaluate when it's time to make a change based on a platform update? And how does your role influence that? So it might be to make a change on an existing platform, adopt a new platform or channel. So even if it's not a social platform, and what's your role, responsibility, take on that kind of as a leader within the organization and in the industry?
That's such a great question. Oh, so go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead, Emma. No, you go ahead.
No. Sorry. I'd just say that I think that we constantly need to be evaluating what our return on investment is for our activity. And if we're not getting a good return on investment for our time, then I'd say things like, and also some channels change overnight. Snapchat was so good for us and then it dived, and we were just like, well, there's just no point in us using that channel in the same way that we did before, and we moved on to stories and then latterly TikTok. But TikTok, we'd really started doing that pre-COVID, and it was going really well when we were on campus and we could get great content. And then we had to stop and pause it, and we're going to go back to it. But then we had to move on to creating content that was not on that channel because of the resource that we had. And the other thing that we did during COVID was that in my team, because we managed student comms, we didn't have a sort of newsletter, so we created a kind of, for students, we created a sort of magazine type student newsletter that we could use on social media as well. It was kind of like zine style with like short clips and things that we could use on social, so that we were maximizing how we were sharing content as well.
And Emma, just to build on that though, how does some of that come from your role as the director? Is it a team? Like, how does some of those decisions get made at the University of Glasgow?
We're lucky that we have a principal president in the States that really gets social media. He's really good on Twitter, and so we just have a lot of trust in us to do what we need to do. So really, I can lead it from a content strategy point of view, and then my team will come up with suggestions. So we don't need to go and get sign off on that. We can be empowered to do that, which I think is really important, because we're the ones listening to the room. We know where the conversations are being had, and we know what space we need to be in to sort of build on those audiences and groups of people.
Perfect. And Jenny Petty, what are your thoughts as a leader in the area and how you make those decisions?
So I was gonna say that as a leader, so much of my job is educating up. So my social teams or content teams will share strategy with me, and then oftentimes it's explaining and educating up into the cabinet about why we're doing something. Or you've probably all experienced this, your cabinet level members might not be getting the ads targeted to them, and then they're like, well, we're not, we don't see this, we're nowhere. And so it's a lot of education of the strategy and the why behind why we're doing things the way we are, and helping the team in that way.
Yeah, awesome. Jenny Lee Fowler, anything to add to that?
Sure. I will say I think I'm a little bit lucky in that I have a lot of freedom to make these decisions, but that came with building trust first, so I think you build the relationships and you build the trust. And so now I have a little bit of some leeway to make these decisions. But, I think the thing is, I'm always honest. I'm really honest with like our resources and what we can do. And just like, Emma mentioned that there's some, sometimes I think people are just afraid of stopping to do so. Like, you can just stop doing something. Just because you have always done something is not a reason to keep doing something. And we're the same. Snapchat did have some there was some energy there, and there's momentum there, but it did kind of drop off for us, right? And so but it was also like a bigger lift. And so we were thinking, if we're not going to get the same return on investment, our engagements are dropping, no need to pour so much of our resources and time into it when resources and time are scarce as it is. And when it comes to evaluating new channels, I think that admittedly, we're, especially in the central office of we're slow adopters. Like, I don't know, everyone's always so eager. I shouldn't say everyone. It just feels like there are a lot of people that are really, really eager to jump on to the next fancy new shiny platform. But I spend a lot of time observing, and lurking, just to see how things kind of pan out. Because, when things are being beta tested, or there's so many more questions than answers. But if anyone in leadership or within the social media community at MIT, it is my job to stay on top of these things. Like, I am aware of their existence, and I'm watching, and I do say that. But, I always say at this time, we're just observing, and we're not moving our strategy in that direction at the moment, because we're still trying to see how things land in those spaces. So we're slow to adopt, and I'm okay with that, actually.
you've each mentioned a good example, I mean, specific to Snapchat or as you're, kind of watching for before adoption. What are some of your tips for adapting? If you're working in this space and you're not a leader, like you're not the leader, you're the social media manager or social media coordinator, or you're in an area that you're managing social, but you're not the one who gets to make all the decisions. What are some of your best practices or recommendations regarding stopping doing things before you make decisions to do new things? Like, how do you make some of those decisions, and what best practices or recommendations would you have for those who might be watching?
I think making as many data-driven decisions as possible is what speaks to leadership and helps drive the decision-making around whether or not to stop or start or continue using a medium. So that would be my biggest piece of recommendation, is dig into those analytics and find that data that you need to help make your argument one way or another.
Cool. So using data, that's super helpful.
I would agree. And in the past, following on from what Jenny Lee said about building trust, we built trust by producing reports on key campaigns we knew had done well that we could then send to the senior management and show in sort of layman terms what that meant and where that had led to, so that they could see that the content that we were creating was having the effect that it wanted, and then we could do more of that, and they would trust us to just do that and be in the right space. And I'd say also that not just about channels, but your approach with strategy. So at the start of COVID, we were doing a lot of Facebook Lives for student and staff questions, because they were obviously concerned about what was happening. And we were also doing short videos to have sort of visible leadership from our principal. And at the start, they were getting really good engagement, but then they started to drop off. And just because something worked before doesn't mean you need to keep doing it. And also trying to explain that to senior management, who then think that that's the silver bullet for always. Like, I was like, yes, for a Facebook Live for students joining us in September and what that's going to look like, great. Not as Facebook Live for an HR strategy. That's just not interesting, and no one's going to watch that. So it's trying to tell them in a nice way that how you work, really.
I think Jenny Petty, you mentioned this a little while ago. It's that leading up. It's that constant education role. And I think as senior leaders, we kind of get that, but I think everybody's role is to kind of educate each other, ourselves, and kind of know what's going on so we can make those decisions. And Emma, I've heard it so many times, like the one strategy that people love, and then they just want to apply it to everything and see if it works, or not even see if it works, just apply it to everything and hope that it works. So that's super helpful. My next question, or kind of the next area, is when have you had to say no or call timeout on a platform or a strategy? And how did you navigate those experiences? And this isn't to be really negative, it's more focused on how do you approach those areas when maybe something isn't the best idea or isn't as well thought out as it should be. What experiences do you have with that, and what can you recommend to those who are tuning in today?
Can I just add a thought to the last question before we kind of move? Like, one thing I always do recommend too, and I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, is that it really helps to take an honest look at what your resources are. I think a lot of times, a social media manager might feel pressure to get onto a new platform, or, it's tough because maybe sometimes the person that they report to might be asking about, the new buzzword, whatever it is, and if they have a strategy. But I think I think the thing is, if you take a really honest look at the type of content you have, there are people that come to me for consultation and they get excited about launching an Instagram account, but then I ask them, great, what pictures do you have? And they're like, well, we haven't really thought about that yet. And I'm like, well, I think you should hold your horses on the Instagram. So I mean, that's sort of, like a real obvious one, but I just think that to take an honest look at your resources, and that might just answer the question of whether you can go into that next new platform. For us, like, I have a thought about TikTok, but I'm not on campus. I'm still, 5 days a week working from home. And it's not I assure you, it's not just going to be me doing TikTok dances for like MIT's, launching. So I think that some things, it's like the circumstances or the resources, like it just makes sense to just say, we're not ready yet, because when you want to launch, you want it to be really good, right? So it's sometimes it's worth the wait. And sorry, and your next question about like when to say no, or I think these opportunities present themselves. Like, when I first came to MIT, one of the things I did was really take a look at all of our platforms, and I was like, why are we on Tumblr? Like, what is this Tumblr doing? And we were kind of using it the same way that we were using Facebook, but it was a different platform. And I literally was like, we're going to stop using Tumblr. And no one has asked me about it, like, ever. Like, no one has said whatever happened to our Tumblr. So I think sometimes you have to just own it and give yourself the authority to say, this is not producing any value for us. Let's sort of stop doing this. But if you have to report upward the data, I know Emma and Jenny mentioned, but if you can just kind of do side-by-side data and kind of talk about the resources that are available, I think you can make it that it makes sense, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Other thoughts?
I'll say that as a leader, and this is something that I've done a lot of reflecting on over the last couple of years, when I have to say no, I always have to do a gut check if I'm saying no from a place of fear or from a place of love. And I think with our social channels, that becomes especially relevant. It's trusting the instincts of our social media managers and our community managers, and getting to a place where you say, ooh, that makes me feel a little weird, but I think it's a weird in a good way. And they're pushing the boundaries, and like they're creating content that traditionally might feel a little edgy, but they know the audience and they understand. And so that's where when I have to say no, it has to be from a place of love and not fear. And I can give you a really good example. A couple of years ago, I was managing a social team, and Cinco de Mayo happened to fall on Taco Tuesday, and they wanted to do a big Taco Tuesday push. And I said, guys, no, like that's not gonna fly, and you've got to be better, and you've got to push yourselves. It's a cheap marketing shot to do that. And it's work that we're all doing right now internally to be better at diversity and inclusion. And so, that's an example of when I had to say no, but it was received well because I could back it up and say, I'm not saying no because I'm scared of the outcome. I'm saying no because it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'd say as well that, I felt more empowered in the last year to say no. And we don't want to be the no team, but we can't always be the yes team. And just because we can do content and we can create amazing things doesn't mean we should do all the, because you get like someone really excited about this tiny piece of work, but it's just like, no. And I had to unashamedly say to people, I'm really sorry, but we're still at the coalface of this. We still have to deal with the sort of everyday questions and things, and we just don't have the time and resource to be doing it. And if we do this, then we can't do this. And that's what I always say as well. And what's going to get more value, and what's our kind of strategic university priorities that you want us to do.
Emma, that I've been taking notes as all of you have been speaking, but I think that's at that point, how do you have that conversation of weighing two options, or saying yes, but it's going to stop this? Like, how do somebody who's in these roles, we're constantly juggling lots of things, and we can only give so much. What are all of your recommendations, kind of balancing or talking more strategically about resources, and being, in my opinion, more honest about what it really does take? Because a lot of people might not realize how much work it goes into writing one tweet, or creating a graphic, or sharing a message, and the amount of time it goes into just triaging the responses and the questions. So do you have any strategies or best practices for talking about resources and what that looks like? And that's kind of an open question.
I think especially during COVID, it came to light how much education had to be done around social media and the value of social media at our institutions. And so managing expectations of that became something for me that came to the forefront during COVID, because I had to not only manage the resources and the expectations around social, but I also had to manage the well-being of my social media team. And that meant at times putting down some incredibly strong boundaries and being the bad cop, which I think if you're leading in these roles, you've got to get more and more comfortable with, because we know the impact that these jobs can have on people's well-being. And no one can perform well when they're sick or they're tired or they're burnt out.
100%, right? And I, I'm a big, I think I've said it like a couple of times already, like, please be like honest about your resources. So of course I'm always, I'm real about it, right? If and how that might work. But you might be surprised to hear I don't have direct reports, but like in the time that I've been at MIT, I've built this amazing, there's so many amazing people at MIT. I've built these like relationships where people know that I am accessible, like I'm open, and I'm available, and I'm and I want to share their content. So I think that like at some point or another, I've really like gotten to know the content creators that are within our at the Institute. And I've just reached out and said, can we put a process in place? I love your videos. Can I get the file? Like when you create something, can I get the file? Of course, I'll give you credit. And so I think over the years I've had these, conversations where now like they just send them to me, right? Or I have, constant conversations with people on our admissions team, because they're working with creators that are students who are just, they're brilliant, and so I just am always trying to tap into the resources throughout the school. And of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, but thankfully they want to work with me because they want me to share their content on the flagship MIT channels. So I at least have that to leverage. I always give credit where credit is due. So I think when you don't have your own team, I think, reaching out to the content creators that come to mind, or just being active Instagram users. You can see the students that are active on Instagram or active on Twitter or creating their own videos on YouTube. So I think, it takes a little bit of work at the beginning to find them and, gain trust and, have those conversations. But toward the, like when it starts to flow, they'll just send you content and, it's a win-win. I feel bad because I feel like I mostly win, but it's a win-win.
For sure.
I agree with that. And I think empowering those people to, to create that content that will go on your channels is important too. We've recently sort of redone our video guidelines, so they're kind of really step-by-step instructions, so that whatever the look and feel is kind of suits the rest of the content that we're creating. We're also looking at having a more video library that's accessible for others, so any content we're creating, we're collaborating, and other people can add like B-roll shots to whatever they want for their particular, because I kind of felt like we were getting to a position where my team, and I was so worried about burnout, were asked to do things that just were not of value to our channels. Yes, was a good video for something else, but if we could create some stuff that we could use, and then they could use it and do their talking head or whatever they wanted to, add it to it, and that was a win-win for us as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's really helpful to hear kind of all the different approaches to resources, those that you manage, those that you can support with content, or those that you can, build relationships with. I mean, resourcing is always such a hard thing to talk about, and also budget and fight for and support. So kind of going off that, and this is more about you or the teams that you lead or the people that you get to work with, how do you establish expectations for yourself, your team, and your boss within your institution? So how, you can speak about each of those levels or one, but just how do you, what are your approaches to setting expectations for doing your role well, or helping your team do their work the best that they can?
I guess I'll start. I feel, I feel incredibly fortunate because I just have such a wonderful boss, and I know that that's not the case for everyone. So, I wish I had more tips in that space, but I think just, for us, it's constantly talking to each other. I do have colleagues that do help me manage channels with the day-to-day posting. I oversee it at the end, but with the day. But I think it's just that we're constantly talking to each other and where we are and how we're doing, how we're feeling, and what we can do for each other. But that I understand that that's tough because that's different in each situation. One thing I did want to add, and I think it's come up a couple of times, but maybe it's on a low, I don't want to say a lower level, but when we do get a lot of requests to post things on our channels, right? And I think that a lot of people who toss these things to us and they're asking us to share them, but a lot of times I feel like when they're doing it as a checked box, they never follow up with you. So one sort of, small tip that I will give to people that get inundated with these requests is just make it sound like a yes, like absolutely, I'm happy to look at it. It's not a promise. And don't say anything afterwards. I mean, like chances are they will not follow up with you, and they don't know that if you did or you didn't. And if they do follow up with you, it's a chance. That's when it's a chance to educate. I did take a look at it. It didn't work. The PDF is not accessible and doesn't work well on our Twitter. So that's the time to educate. But I've learned that when you say it beforehand, all people, a lot of times people just hear the no and they'll push harder, and there's no education moment there. But when they just toss things to you, I'll just say, thank you so much. I will definitely consider it, or, thank you. I will look at it. And I'm telling you, I don't remember people who follow up and just let it lie, Yeah,
for sure.
It's also like when people email you this whole email chain and say, can you put this on social? And it would take you like 2 hours to understand what they're even asking you to do. So we always now, and I've educated my team to go back to them and say, okay, great. That sounds like you, Jenny. That sounds like a good idea, but can you summarize this? Can you create a tweet for me and let me know because otherwise it's too ridiculous for us to have to decipher that and then turn it into something that's meaningful. And then it might not even be worth putting it out on the channels anyway.
Emma, is that something that you have to do, or is your team empowered to do that? I guess
my team are empowered to do that, and they'll always check if they're not sure of something, but generally they'll know what the approach is to take. But they know that they can give me a shout if they want a second opinion or just a bit of backup on it, and I can step in and support their decision.
Awesome.
My style is to focus on building relationships and trust before setting really firm expectations, which might be good or bad, I'm not sure, but that's always been my style, is to try to build consensus and build that trust so that when I do have to push back firmly on something, I have that well to pull from, where people know, okay, she's doing this for the right reasons, or I trust that when she's pushing back on this, it's because she has not pushed back on so many other things, which is probably a deep dive into leading as a woman and feminism and all sorts of things that we probably need to get into at another time, Tyler, but that's always been my approach.
I love it.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I mean, I will totally, I will 100% agree with all of that. And I think if it's a certain level of person, like if I have to say no, I don't say no, I offer a yes, right? Like I don't say, I'm like, oh, that seems like it would be a great fit for this. And so I make whatever I can offer. And I feel like that's a helpful tip.
Yeah. Jenny Petty, I know you mentioned that you're building relationships for some of these expectations. what does that relationship building look like? So if you're not just setting firm expectations, I guess, how do you approach some of that? So if you're new to social, or if you're at a level in which you maybe are trying to build relationships up or across, what are maybe some of your recommendations for how that can be done?
Yeah, networking and listening. So I'm in the first 6 weeks of my first role as a CMO. And that is good. My philosophy is that I'm making judgment calls, but I'm also taking the time right now to build the relationships through meeting with folks and listening and asking, how has my department served you in the past? How can they serve you in the future? Where are the gaps? What's missing? And I think that's not just something that we should be doing at the beginning of a job. That's something that we have to do. We have to be seeking feedback from folks, through our whole journey in a position. So I think listening, especially for social media managers, who I think, despite the fact that there is kind of this almost caricature that social media managers are like the life of the party and like the extroverts, I think a lot of the time our social media managers are some of the best listeners we have, that have their pulse on audiences that other folks might not. So networking and listening that's always been the way I build relationships, and also letting your guard down a little bit. I can be pretty goofy and I like to joke around, and early on in a job, some people don't really know how to handle that yet, but they will over time. And it's about, for me, that feels authentic. That feels like showing up as who I am, is telling them really funny stories about the messes my kids create for me and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. Emma or Jenny, do you have other examples of kind of either times you've had to set clear expectations for yourself or your team has done, especially over the last year? I feel like setting expectations versus doing everything for everyone is a consistent conversation that we have to have. Any advice in those areas?
We've just started to go. I said to the team, we can't keep firefighting. We need to get back to the way that we like working, as in having a bit of time to plan and looking at what some of the main objectives for the university are out with COVID. So yes, our research, yes, being a civic university, sustainability, but also we started as a communications team writing a sort of very simple grid for, internal comms, media, my team, student comms, social media, and we send that to senior management so that they can see what we have on our plate. So if they want to ask us to do something else, that they know what we're doing. And I think that helps to say, this is what we've got. And we try and have a little bit of flex in the plan, because the reactive stuff and the sort of, not that we've had a huge amount of time to do the sort of creative storytelling that we would have time for, but I think having that flex is important, because otherwise, if you're literally bouncing from one thing to the next, which we've all been doing over the last year, you've got nothing left in the tank. And that's something I've been super worried about my team in the last year, because as I said before, we've been at the cold face of this, and it's been exhausting for everyone.
Just to touch on the relationship building portion that you were talking about, I think when it has to do, so I do a lot of consultation and advising and with new social media managers that come into the MIT community. I manage a social media working group, and so I think early on for new people, I make sure, or I'm just available, right? I make myself available, because I think when there are people that are new to the community, it's a fire hose of information. And so, I always make sure I get back to people on Slack, like I just say, Slack me any questions you want. And so in that space, I just, want them to know that I'm their team, right? We have so many like communications teams of one, and they happen to also be doing social media. So I want them to know that I am their team. And when it comes to like buy-in from leadership, like if they do extend something to me, like if they say, will this photo work for social media channels? Like it's the first time they're actually reaching out, or go out of my way to make sure it works for our, and then I follow up with them and say, gosh, thank you for that photo. It created 150 retweets. And, I give them like a little mini like engagement follow-up. That's maybe a little shot of dopamine, but, I just want them to remember that, and it makes them feel good. And then in future like instances, they might share more, right? So I just kind of want to say thank you so much and make sure that they know it was worth their while. So I think just for relationship building and in the sense of managing expectations, like I just think I'm just trying to normalize, like, you will not hear from me after 5 o'clock on during the week. I will not email you on the weekend, and we were in a meeting where we were trying to get people together, and my vice president of communications was like, Jenny, if you need to, just email me Saturday, like maybe you can get us together on Saturday. And I just looked at him and I said, I am not doing that to you. I said, nope. I'm like, someone else might do that, but I know. And so I'm like, we will find another time during the week to meet, and so it's just we're just trying to normalize that sort of like boundary setting. And when we have students that work, I know in admissions there are a lot of students that help them with marketing products and help them with that kind of thing, and they say, if you can't do it, if you can't do this, they totally normalize, it's okay, but just let me know, no, it's fine. And honestly, I think it's knowing that it's not weighted on their, I think it makes them feel better to know that it's okay if they need to pull out, and they've never missed a deadline on anything. I just think it's just normalize that stuff.
I think for us, it's also been educating people that the effect of other comms might have on the social channel. So for example, we went for a really bad stage where we were asked to send out emails at like late afternoon on a Friday. And I was like, if you do that, you guys or other teams are going to have to be looking at your inbox, because you will get a response to that email, or my team or myself are going to have to spend the whole weekend looking at the content or people being annoyed on social, and it's just not, and we're not doing that. It'll wait till Monday, and that is what we're going to do. So we set a policy that we wouldn't be sending out emails late.
I did that. I had that exact scenario present itself last summer, Emma, and it was to the point where my team was so burnt out and they wanted to the administration wanted to make a major announcement on a Friday afternoon. And I think it must have been, I was just feeling especially scrappy because it had been such a brutal time, but I laid the cards on the table. Like I said, well, my team won't be responding to these, but we would be happy to give you the password and access to our social accounts, and you can manage it. And not a single person said yes. And that was like, okay, if it's good enough it's not good enough for mine, like.
And I think I had this same experience last week. It's reminding people about what it actually takes to do some of the work and what the impact is on people. I had thought of an idea for a Sunday, and my manager said, well, I don't really want to have to respond to things. Like, you can't just set it and forget it. And if we have questions, I don't really want to have to be tuned in. And I was like, of course not. Like, I don't want you to be tuned in either. And so we just talked to my boss, and she said, well, of course not. I don't want, like, so sometimes it's just, we forget a little bit, and it's, normalizing kind of what that looks like you said, Jenny, and having those conversations. And my boss was like, yeah, it's Easter and it's also a Sunday. Like, nobody needs to be working on that day. So we'll hold that message or thing for another day. There are times and places when messages have to go because of timing, but having those authentic conversations. So I have kind of a final question to round us out, and it's going to go two ways, so you can decide which way you'd like to go. How do you normalize boundaries, or what are some tips you have for refilling the tank for yourself or for your team, or protecting that tank for your team, knowing that we all kind of have different roles and expectations for ourselves and for the people that we support on our teams? So normalize boundaries, or fill and or protect your tank.
I'm so bad at both of those.
Oh. Well, and that's okay. We have to admit that. Our first way to fix things is to admit it.
I'm so much better at taking care of other people than myself. And so last summer, what I did was unofficially, I got no permission to do this, but my team had been working, especially the social team, had been working so hard that I said, we're doing summer Fridays. No, but you're not working on Fridays. You're going to do a 4-day week. Like if a crisis occurs, yes, but I just gave them that freedom, like knowing and recognizing that they were working so hard and they deserved that time. And so that was one way. We also started doing, and I ripped this off from Carrie Phillips at Arkansas Tech, but we started doing a virtual Friday pancake breakfast once a week at my old position, where it was an hour-long meeting where you weren't allowed to talk about work. So you brought your pancakes, and it was that missing kind of that water cooler piece of being in the office. But self-care has and continues to be a struggle for me, and something that I have to get better about.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like we can all get better. It's like, but I will say that I try to lead by example. Like if you, I really mean it when I don't email people like after 5 p.m., especially other social media managers. And for the social media working group that I manage, we've been in Slack since 2016. So when we all moved off of campus, we were a well-oiled machine in that space. And gosh, it did help. It ended up being fortuitous because it helped us a lot. But it's a really engaging community. And I show my vulnerability in that space. So I give people an opportunity or a place to kind of express themselves. Like I feel like if I'm open with them, then they can be open as well. And so every now and then I like to do a check-in, and I'll just say something like, using only emojis and GIFs. Tell me how you're feeling right now. And I'll start and I'll just be like, I'll use a GIF that's like someone's, and then people will engage, right? It's such a, I'm so proud of this community. It's a very engaged community, and people are really showing how they're doing. And so we can laugh about it, but also like, and we reach out to each other probably in direct messaging and just kind of offer that space to just kind of be vulnerable. I think that's important.
Sure.
I have quick meetings with my team every morning, and again, sometimes it's not about work, it's just checking in after the weekend how they're doing, and I ring them up. And I'm the same as you guys. I'm definitely more trying to make sure they're okay with it, and I need to probably lead by example in terms of switching off as well. But saying to them, like this week, a lot of people are out of the office because it's the Easter holidays, so I just said, have a quiet week. If you want to finish early when you've done your work, just do, because we don't get many moments where we can do that. So feel empowered to, because I've been off for a couple of days, just to switch off when you want to, and obviously keep your phone near if anything kicks off, but feel free to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think as leaders and managers and kind of working with people, we always tend to have that high empathy and, protecting them, but also knowing that we have to kind of lead by that example and do the work, so that for those who maybe don't feel like they can do it themselves, like not that we should all leave early and they should stay late, like that would be silly, but kind of having that expectations and that. So any final thoughts or ideas that have kind of popped in your head over this last hour that you want to leave the viewers with?
I just wanted to tack on to what Jenny and Emma said about just, we need to normalize conversations about mental health in the workplace. And that's also something that rose to the surface managing over the last year, was just being really open and vulnerable with my team about like, hey, we're not all okay. Here are the resources that are available to us. Sharing some of my own struggles was just something that I think went a long way in helping folks get through the roughest parts of COVID, especially the folks who lived alone were always on my mind. And so I did things like sent them, coffee and pastry that I would have delivered to their house or things like that, right? I think it's just keeping a pulse on how your team is doing, especially your social team, is so important.
Yeah, and I totally agree. and also giving them praise and saying this was a great job, doing that regularly. And I did the same at Christmas. I went around with like little Christmas bags for each of them to say, you know, it was a small thing, but it was just to show appreciation. And same with the people, and because some members of the team have been fine working from home, but others have not. They've just not enjoyed it, whether it be hard to focus, missing that connection with their teammates. And I think it's really hard to sort of brainstorm creatively on Zoom. Like, it's just not the same as sitting in a room with a packet of cookies and like just thrashing ideas around. You just can't do that over online, I don't think, as much. So
I think my parting thought might be, don't feel like you have to be in all of the social spaces. Like I often tell communications people of one, teams of one, like just do one or two, you know, just do one channel, but do it really well. Like just focus on that channel. Like never have I ever heard someone say, oh, did you see that TikTok? But man, if that person was also on Twitter and Instagram, it's too bad. No one says that, right? Or if you're like, oh gosh, you know, like if content is really good, it will jump platforms. Like people will share tweets in Instagram and LinkedIn, you know? So I just think that we put pressure on ourselves to be in all of these spaces, but just like stop. You don't have to be in all of the spaces.
Yeah, no, those are all great thoughts. And I really appreciate each of you joining us today. Thank you. If you do have comments for Jenny, Emma, or Jenny, please leave them in the comment section on Facebook, or if you want to find them on Twitter, they've all outwardly admitted that is their second home or their online space that you can find them. They're all sharing great resources all the time, or are easy to connect with if you have some follow-up questions. We will have another session next week. Thanks for everything and have a great weekend.